Budget shop press upgrades for use as a press brake.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. On today's episode I'm going to be giving you a little bit of a better look at the press brake that I've made up. You may have spotted it in the background of a few of the previous videos of the mill. Obviously this press isn't finished, it's still a work in progress, but it's something that I've managed to use quite a few times now, and I thought I'd just give a little bit of an update on where I am.
I've managed to capture some of the process of welding this framework up. So here's a shot of TIG welding some extra reinforcements to the top side of the press framework, and I've then moved on to removing the original upper thick steel plate for the press to land on. Once this plate was removed, I then divided it up into 3 sections and cleaned off all the paintwork, ready to weld on some reinforcement plates to the spine of these thicker plates. So with all the plates now cleaned up, I'm ready to set them up and get these spines welded on to the 20mm plate. The first one, I used the TIG welder to practice some walking of the cup, and after doing this first plate the argon bottle actually ran out, so I've had to then move on to the MIG. With these upper plates being 20mm thick, I have used the MIG welder on its highest setting to get some really good penetration into these parts, and you may be able to spot I've also spined these 20mm plates with some 10mm plate to make this upper framework extremely rigid. And I'm just going through there checking that the plates are square, tack them out and then burn them in. Make sure that they're all nice and solid, really well attached, and then we know this framework's not going to budge when I'm pressing any jobs in the future. Drilling out the central locating bolt position. This will allow me to keep both parts together while I drill all the holes and not have them wander. Then a light chamfer on all the holes on both sides. The chamfering complete, I then moved on to tapping out all the 31 holes to an M10 thread. With all the clamping bolts secured, I can now mark out, drill and countersink the fixture points that will hold the jaws to the press body. Securing the jack mounting plate to the punch jaws. Before the final fitment, I chamfered the edge of the locating jaws using a carbide bit in a palm router. This worked extremely well and I'm really pleased with the results. So to help with alignment of the punch head, I'm going to use 2 linear guide rails, and to get these fixed in place I am machining up 2 blocks here, just squaring these up to begin with, just skimming off all the faces, making sure they're nice and square, nice and smooth. Quickly deburr all the edges as I work through the different faces. Make sure there's no burrs sticking out affecting the fitment in the vice jaws. With these bearing blocks now squared up, I can move on to drilling out the bolt hole pattern for the fixture bolts and the adjustment Allen grub screw in the centre. Using a carbide stub drill to work with the limited throat depth that I have on this machine, I then moved on to countersinking the mating face and then swap the blocks over and counterbore the backside to allow a Allen head bolt to sit within the blocks and not protrude. Just lightly manually deburr the inside of the counterbores, and then we can test fit the blocks to the bearings just with some hex head bolts, which will be swapped out for Allen head bolts. So with the machining now done, I got the TIG welder out and fixed these blocks in place. What I'm going to have a look at today is the actual base plate here. As you can see, I've welded that up and it's pretty substantial how it is, but I would like to machine the surface as these little cross braces here. When I've welded them in, they're just not quite perfectly flush, so I'm going to go ahead and set this base up on the mill and use a shell mill to just face off the whole surface. Then I can think about building my backstops for the bottom V-die and give me a nice solid square face to work off, as I've got some gears that I need to press the bushes out of, and I'd quite like to use this press to do that job, but I don't want to start doing that until I know I've got a nice level plane to be pressing against, because at the moment it's a little bit all over the shop. And I also got these V plates with the press,
and you might not be able to tell. Well, you can't tell. One is a different thickness to the other, and I've never managed to get a matching set yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to machine the surface down on the thick one and then skim the thin one, so they both have a machined surface. So as you can see here, I've now got the base table for the press brake sitting on the machine here, on the Ajax Universal Milling Machine, and I've got this set up with a shell mill here to just skim the face, doing the full travel of the table. Then I'll move this along and then machine the next section until I've done the entire length of this lower table here. Just having a look here, as you can see, just using a straight edge, it's catching on that lip there. You can see we've got a bit of a gap, so I'm just wanting to achieve a nice parallel surface between the top face and the bottom face, where it's going to land on the pins in the press. And this central piece here is where I'd like to be able to use the V plates in the center here. And at the moment the V plates themselves are a different depth, one slightly narrower than the other, and obviously this surface isn't flat, so whenever you try and set something in it to press, it's putting it off on a skew, which is no good. So we'll get this whole face skimmed nice and flat, and then it can go back into the press. So I've just repositioned the clamps there, as I've got a little bit more travel on the table than I'd clamped for. And as you can see on the front face here, I still need to take a little bit more out to get a nice machined face all the way through. So before I finish this section off to the final depth, I wanted to move the clamps, allow as much travel as possible, and hopefully get across this face here, and then I can move the whole setup across and go again. It's making good progress so far though. Happy with how it's looking. So I've just repositioned the clamps there, and lowered the table and zeroed it out before I lowered it, and then I've brought it back up to 0 now, so that should be cutting at the same level, and we can get the next pass to get just to say before the clamps, and then we'll have to move it along again and do the last little section. So you can see here the difference in the height of the two V plates I have, which this was the pair that came with the press, so obviously a mismatched pair. Would have been nicer to have had two slightly thicker ones, but I'm just going to have to mill the face off this thicker one to bring it down to this thickness of the thinner one, and I'll then skim the face of the thin one as well, just to give it a nice flat surface. So I've got these V blocks just set up in the milling machine, and I've measured them up, and one is 25.8 and one is 28.5. so someone's got muddled up when they've been measuring the plates, so I'm just going to skim off the 3mm off this thicker one and then check the thicknesses and get them skimmed to being a matching pair. And then I've got this lower shelf reinstalled on the press. It's looking really good, nice and flat, a lot better than it has been. Another step closer to getting this thing properly set up and usable for the long term. Just been having a little bit tweak of the setup of this press this morning. As you can see, I've managed to get all three of the bottle jacks pushed back up or compressed back down, and I've taken one of the clips out of the spring tensioners to shorten the length of the springs, as they've been stretched out over a period of maybe a year and a half now, so they were able to actually give me a little bit more length than they could when I initially fitted them. So that's why I've managed to get rid of the clip and get it set up nicely now, where the spring rate is even on both sides, as it's slightly offset to one side, the weight, because of the way the jacks are laid out. So I've had to put a little bit more tension on the left hand side there to get it riding nice and sweet up and down on the linear bearings there. So I'll just give you a little demonstration. Obviously the press will never run at that sort of speed, but it's nice to see the spring rate pretty even throughout the whole die there. So the next plan of attack for this press is to make up a shelf for the bottom, just to hold all the tooling so it's not dropping off the press, and it's easily accessible for when I want to swap between being the press brake or having a press shaft with some interchangeable tips for different jobs, and having a selection of different sized spaces. I've just had a little look through me pile of bits and pieces behind the workshop, and we've got some framework here from some old shelving that came out the workshop, and this is going to work brilliantly to make a little shelf for the bottom of the press, just to support some of the tooling and stop anything dropping on your toes or dropping any broaches through and snapping them when they hit the floor. So this is going to be a handy little addition to have. And the shelf that I've picked here, it's just a little bit too wide, so I'm just using my little Starrett square here to measure in 44 centimeters from either side, and then I'll cut the center out and re-weld this back together to the correct width of 88 centimeters, which is going to be suitable for going in between the uprights of the press. So I've got this 2-inch box just cut up into 3 sections here, and then I've divided the length by 3 and then set those little support lengths at those measurements to give it a nice evenly spaced extra support legs just poking out the back to go underneath the shelf and take a bit of the extra weight that the tooling will have, as the angle iron that the edge of the shelf's made out of is not really substantial enough to support the weight of some of the tooling that will be sitting there. So this is going to make for a proper job, and I'm not going to have any worries in the future about overloading the shelf with tooling or parts that are just sitting there waiting to be worked on, you know. So it's going to be good. Got it set up on the fixture plate here from Fireball Tools, and that's made it really easy to get the whole thing squared up and clamped down in place before I TIG weld up the joins, and then I'll flip it over, clamp it all down again and weld the other side. So we'll get to that now, and that's getting closer to getting this shelf finished up. So as you can see, I've got this lower support framework now all tigged up, and I've just taken off the mill scale and a bit of the paint on this angle iron at the round the edge here, and I'm just going to quickly put a couple of tacks along here with the TIG, and that'll be more than substantial enough, as all the weight's getting distributed through this lower framework and it's all compression weight, so the welds just being little tacks will be more than substantial. So once that's done, we'll get a plate cut to go into this shelf, and then it can get some holes drilled through. Once we've got those holes through, I can put some 25mm pins through and weld those in place.
So with the welding now finished on this lower shelf for the press brake tooling, I'm now set up with the mill in horizontal mode. I've took the top spindle back, the vertical spindle out the way, and I've got the horizontal spindle set up there with a twist drill that is 31/32, which is just a fraction beneath an inch. And then I've got an inch reamer here to go in, and if I've got the length on the reamer, I will ream the hole out to an inch bore, and then I can slot a pin through and weld the pin through the hole into the box, and then this whole shelf can slide in and out of the existing holes on the press framework and just be held in place with a locking pin in the back, so the shelf never drops out. Not that it should once it's loaded up, but obviously with the limited space I have at the end of this box here beyond where the shelf sits, the mag drill just wouldn't quite fit in, so it's a good excuse to set this horizontal milling machine up and use a nice Morse taper 3 drill bit there that's going to make a good nice solid hole without any bother, as the mag drill was going to be a bit of a chew on to try and get set up, and then it was just not enough clearance for the body to get past this angle here, so that should do as well. So I've just set up to drill out the other side here. I had a look at setting up the reamer, but turns out the reamer that I've got was a second-hand reamer that I bought for a pretty cheap price. So I can't complain too much, but once I got it set up in the machine, the reamer itself actually has a bend in it, and I'll insert a short video of that just after this video. To show you the bend in the reamer. So I'm just going to go ahead and drill out to this drill size, which is 30 seconds, and then that'll be suitable enough for the support pins, and I'll just turn down the very end of a 1-inch shaft just to suit that size, and then we can work around the issue of not having the reamer. So we'll get on, drill this hole out. It's just a little bit of an awkward setup as we've got the workpiece hanging off to the right hand side of the machine, and this machine doesn't have dual controls, so I've got to try and squeeze underneath the workpiece, get everything adjusted, and then I'm pretty much where I want to be now. I've got my 0 for the height, but it was the left and right obviously it's changed, so I've got it pretty much lined up where I want it, and I can now just set to drill this hole through. Use the power feeds to just let it drill through itself. Make sure nothing's engaged with the feeds. Start up the machine. So, made it through. That's worked spot on.
So I'm just set up here to cut the base plate out of some 5mm sheet steel for the press brake tool and shelf. As you can see here, we've got a new addition to the workshop.
Got the Artec Plasma 31C. This is a 30 amp plasma cutter, and I got this on a decent deal as it was a shop soiled item, so they must have had it as a demonstration unit or had it on display in one of the main warehouses. So I'm pretty pleased with the price I paid for this, and we'll give it a go today. Certainly going to speed up the process and reduce the need for slitting discs. So we'll see how she cuts. So I'm pretty pleased with how that first side's cut there. A little bit jagged because I'm just taking my time with it being 5mm thick, but it does cut it, and I think I just need to get my hand steadied a bit more and get the feed rate kind of dialed in. But for this job it's done exactly what I needed it to, and it saved us a good half an hour on the angle grinder to slit this plate up. So that's a test fit of the 5mm base plate there, and it fits really nice in the shelf. So I've got some 25mm round stock here, and I'm just going to turn up some pins to support the lower tooling shelf on the press brake. That's not ideal. Halfway through a job and the chuck's wobbled loose. Hopefully it's just this lock ring and the vibes have loosened it off. Never had that happen before. Just trying to part off this shaft and the bloody chuck started to wobble. Let's see how she runs. Crazy. Don't know how that's managed to loosen itself. I'll have to watch the videos back and see if I can spot anything. But we'll get this parted off. Successfully parted off, even with the chuck coming loose. With the support pins now both turned down to size, I can move on to machining some retaining caps for the ends of the shafts, and these will have a countersink suitable for a 90-degree M10 bolt head. These caps are going to make sure that the shelf can never rattle loose while the press is under use. So with these pins now turned down, I'm happy with the fitment that they have into the box section, and I've threaded the ends with an M10 by 1.5 thread to allow for a clamping bolt to go into the end there and hold the pin into the end of the box. So I've got these 4 blanking caps now turned down, and these will take a 10mm countersunk bolt to allow the ends of the bar not to be able to come out when the jacks are operating and the whole press is vibrating. So I'll just show you how these are going to sit in.
As you can see, we've got the M10 thread in the end of that bar there, in that shaft. Just trying to get it started one-handed. So that's now nipped up nice and snug, and with there being a slight relief on the diameter here, there is a nice stop shoulder, so this shaft won't pull through, and it's nice and solid and well secured to the shelf itself. So I'm really pleased with how that's fitted, and we can get this shelf installed onto the press and get the press used. So it was a bit of a snug fit, but I've now got this lower shelf in place and it's locked to the framework using the 25mm shafts that I've turned, and got those countersunk caps for each side of the shaft, just so the shaft can't ever rattle off while in use. And I've got the 5mm plate that I cut ready to go on, and then we can get this shelf loaded up with some tooling. So I've just loaded up a few basic tools here, just things that I've used on the press so far, and the two lower V dies that I've got for the press brake. So with everything now sort of coming together, I'm gonna end this video for now, as it's getting quite long, and we'll come back in the next episode where I get all this plumbed up and connect up the foot pedal, and we'll get some first proper tests under air power and see how everything holds up after a few test bends. So I couldn't help myself, I'm going to have to just have a quick go of this press under air power. I've got it all plumbed up now, and I've set the clutch drive basket that I'm changing the bearings on up on the press plate, and I've already driven the first bearing out just to test it out, so I'll drive the second bearing out on camera and we can see how the press works. So it's all lined up in position, got my little driver in place, and the bearing will just drop through once we're all the way through this mandrel, through this clutch basket. So just touch off gently. There we go, bearings out. She works a treat. So that's pushed out of there really nicely without any damage to any of the parts. And that's the little driver I used to push these needle roller bearings out of place. Just aluminium with an O-ring on the end there. just free floating, so you can adjust it as you go rather than having a fixed pin that could potentially push skewed into your part. This can float like a floating tap holder. So that's really good. Worked a treat for removing the bearings, and when I come to reinstalling, it'll help for pushing them the majority of the way. And then I've always got the manual control on the hand lever to take in those final adjustments for the last little bit, driving the bearing down to its final depth. So thank you all for watching, and in the next episode we'll be getting a look at putting on these pulleys and a hand crank winch to move the table up and down without any struggle.